I am extremely excited for us to dive into our topic today, and we are going to be sharing some tips about fueling an active lifestyle.
I know. I'm excited too. I feel like this is a topic that both you and I are really passionate about, so it should be a good conversation.
And I think a lot of people, when they're focusing on being active, which for us means increasing activities of daily living by walking or more intentional training, going to the gym, starting a program at home, we're not always thinking about how do I get the right nutrients to fuel that to get the best outcomes.
Yes, you're so right. A lot of times it can be geared toward improving cardiovascular health, but many times it's geared toward weight loss, which can be a great goal. But you're absolutely right. That comes with restriction rather than thinking about how can we fuel properly with the right balance of nutrients.
And I think we have some tips that once you understand, not to say the science behind them, but the reasoning behind them, you'll recognize they're pretty intuitive.
Yep.
They all kind of make sense. And I think it makes sense for us to start about what we need to think about before we exercise. And we kind of think about timing and then types of food.
Yes.
So those are the two kind of key things we're going to dive a little bit deeper in today.
Yes, yeah. So when we think about your average person who might currently be pretty sedentary but wants to start some sort of activity regimen a few times per week, less than an hour per day, what are you going to recommend for fueling their activity?
I think the first thing you have to think about is what time of day are you going to be exercising? And I think the first example I'm going to go into is if you're exercising in the afternoon or evening, you actually need to start thinking about that exercise about 3 to 4 hours before. And I think what makes nutrition so tough is that it's not a one time a day decision. We have to think about it quite extensively, but about 3 to 4 hours before, you're hoping that you're going to have what we would call a balanced meal. And this is hopefully going to incorporate some form of carbohydrates, which are going to provide quick fuel and energy to our body. You're going to get protein to help stabilize those energy. And then fat is something that we actually want to aim to have further out from exercise because that's going to really slow down that digestion. So when we think about these food choices, it's pretty much a mixed meal. Like we talk about my plate a lot. You might have some chicken, you might have a sweet potato, you might have some veggies with some, again, a sauce on that. It's a pretty basic focus for the 3 to 4 hour mark, again, before exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really great point because we're constantly talking about balance, but that timing of the nutrition is going to be key. Not only that, but also the type of exercise that you're engaged in. And so I would typically recommend, if you're going out for a brisk walk and you're kind of used to that, it's not a super high level of activity for you, depending on your current fitness level, you might be able to tolerate a little bit more. But if you are doing something that's super high intensity, you're running, you're jumping, something like that, or involved in some sort of sport, then that is where it can really cause some digestive stress to have a really heavy meal right before. And another thing that we tend to recommend as part of an overall balanced diet is lots of fiber.
Yes, yeah.
Because most Americans are only getting about half of the fiber that they need. Women need about 25 grams per day, men 38 grams per day. And we're only getting about half of that. However, fiber is something that can really cause that stomach upset, some gastrointestinal distress if you're doing that right before activity.
And it's kind of counterintuitive because people would say, I'm eating a healthy food, but it might just not be the right time to add that healthy food in. And so as we get closer, if you haven't had that meal in that 3 to 4 hour time period and you are doing something more strenuous, the next time clock is about an hour before exercise. And we talk about simple carbohydrates. And so when we name these to people, they're kind of surprised because they're like, oh, well, is there a ton of nutrient benefit there? The goal of these is that they're quickly digestible and they can help go into our bloodstream and then also offering access to our muscles to have that energy to fuel the activity.
I think there's a little bit of a misconception around what a simple carbohydrate is. Simple versus complex versus, fiber. So go into a little bit about some examples of simple carbohydrates that you would recommend.
Yeah, so simple carbohydrates in general mean that they are going to be digested more quickly. This can be things like fruits, fruit juices, milk and dairy products, which depending on the person, might also not be something if you're a little more sensitive to dairy to include. And then even you mentioned low fiber based carbohydrates. So like graham crackers, a slice of maybe like lower fiber bread. So I think that's hard for people because they're like, wait, these dietitians are telling me get all this fiber in, add all of this. But that 1 hour before, we want easy to digest and then thinking quick nutrients. Do you have a favorite pre-workout snack?
Oh, I think bananas are one of the things that are the easiest.
Yes.
It's going to give you that quick sugar. Yes, sugar.
Yes.
That's going to fuel. You do need some blood sugar to be able to exercise at the level that you want to. So I think bananas with a little bit of peanut butter. You might hear peanut butter and think, well, that's fat. They just told me don't eat a lot of fat right before, but in a smaller amount. When I say avoid fat right before exercise, I'm talking like fatty cuts of meat, fried foods. But I know for you, it's a little bit different because your tolerance to peanut butter before exercise is not the same.
And I would recommend people to try it, but personally, it gives me the worst acid reflux before I exercise. So I find myself being like, ooh, I'm not feeling like I can get into this activity because I'm distracted by my digestive function. I really like yogurt. It's like an easy option for me. It has a little bit of protein, pretty easy to digest. I'm also on the banana train with you, or I'm doing just some really simple I really like to get after it in the gym, so I do focus on some more simple sugars, even like a homemade Rice Krispie treat.
Yes.
Which is surprising because people are like, is that a lot of sugar to put in before I exercise? But if you're doing higher intensity, the benefit is that you're going to give your body those nutrients to quickly utilize. You're not going to face fatigue, and then you might find your workouts end up going a little bit better.
Yes, yeah. And you think about fueling. So we've talked a little bit about afternoon, evening workouts. If you're having a morning workout, early morning, 5 a.m., something like that, a lot of people are probably not going to be too enthused about getting up and eating breakfast at that time. Some people do. What would your guidance be for that? Maybe the evening before, maybe it's something small, depending on what they're doing.
Something really small. And that's where liquid-based carbohydrates, like we see sports drinks or even doing a few ounces of juice. I like applesauce in the morning. It's cold. It's really easy for you to get down. It's shelf stable, which is always really nice. But you bring up another great point. That evening time, you might need to do a snack before bed. Similar concept, giving yourself some carbohydrates. And then there, I would probably push a little bit more on the quality of those carbs because you're going to have longer to digest, but you're getting that energy in your body to prepare you for that next day.
That's so right. I think there's a misconception around eating carbohydrates in the evening, but especially if you're planning and preparing for that morning exercise, if you're doing something high intensity or if you're running in the morning, you want to make sure your glycogen stores are nice and topped off to be able to fuel you, because that is, we really neglect the role that carbohydrates play in being able to fuel exercise.
And I think so many people, when they think about if your goal for exercise is weight management, a lot of people say, well, the way I'm going to lose weight is by cutting carbs.
Yes.
And then you might notice, well, I'm getting fatigued, or I'm not feeling like doing, or higher increase for injury. That's my biggest concern. If you're underfueled, you mentioned glycogen, which I know our little biochemistry brains like to flex sometimes. That is that stored form of sugar in the muscle. If your body is so low from carbohydrates from the diet, it's actually going to deplete those stores in the muscle. And again, that's going to set you up for risk of injury or not being able to complete exercise. And then I think we end up running into that vicious cycle of afterwards too, you're like, well, I'm ravenous. I'm so hungry. This isn't a sustainable thing. So it is a bit of that happy medium, I think.
Yes. Do you think that there might be a role, say somebody is looking to lose weight, but still wants to fuel, an efficient exercise routine. They want to continue performing at their best. What role do you think cutting some carbohydrates could play, and how might you schedule those carbohydrates?
Yes. And I think it is partly carbohydrates, but another big, what we call macronutrient. So we have protein, carbs, and fat. Those are really the only three things we can mix around to contribute those calories. Protein is the other essential piece. We call it protein sparing weight loss.
Yes.
Where if you're not eating adequate protein consistently throughout the day, that's going to affect also that muscle synthesis. Now, if you're doing lower carb, we talk about consistent carbohydrates. So don't try to eliminate, I'm having no carbs at breakfast, I'm having no carbs at lunch, but it might be beneficial to do that meal timing and say, I know if I'm going to include carbs throughout my day, I'm going to time it before the exercise and aim for about a 15 to 20 gram serving after exercise to replenish that glycogen that we talked about.
Yeah. You mentioned, the quality of carbohydrates that you would want to focus on the night before, where you have plenty of time to digest that. So something that's got fiber, but also vitamins and minerals. I think that, potatoes would be a good option. What are some other things that you might recommend?
Love berries, always starchy vegetables too, like you mentioned. So like root vegetables are great, parsnips, even like rice, quinoa. So that's where pasta. That's that marathon runner coming out and you. So those are some things to think about in that evening time period. And I think when we are saying this, we're recognizing it's individual to the person and it takes a little bit of experimentation.
Yes.
But any type of eating regimen that's completely restricting or eliminating food groups more than likely is not going to set you up for feeling good when we try to add on a lot of exercise on top of that. So it might mean that on days where you're going to have a rest day and you're not going to be as active, you can get by with maybe dropping carbohydrates a little bit more. And so you might end up doing a bit of like shifting with your diet depending on what you're planning on doing for exercise.
And then thinking about planning ahead for that next day, because it might be a rest day and you think, okay, I can get by with fewer carbohydrates, but at what level will I be exercising tomorrow too? So that comes into play. And again, it comes back to the timing of your workouts too.
And if I was coaching someone through this, my suggestion would be nail down your meals first, right? Get your meal times to where you're recognizing some of those macros we talked about. You're practicing that plate method we talk in content quite a bit about. And then once you've got your like big fueling throughout the day, I think it's easier for us to make smart choices with snacking. Where if we're only eating once or twice a day, the likelihood you're reaching for less nutritious foods or things that are just easily accessible goes way, way up.
Yes.
And we know the quality of that then is going to affect how you're feeling. And again, we're faced with those frustrations of saying, I'm trying to make all these changes and I just feel like I can't figure it out. A lot of times people are trying to do too many things at once.
Yes. Or, and you said restricting total food groups, but I think also the total volume of food, the total quantity of food too. You can't talk about weight loss without talking to some extent about calorie, because you do need a calorie deficit for weight loss, but you don't need an 1,000 calorie deficit for weight loss, and that will certainly affect your workout routine. So modest restrictions can really go a long way, and it will be gradual without affecting your performance as much during those exercise sessions.
And our rule of thumb that we talk about is anywhere from 250 to maybe 500 calories. And that's the deficit, the calorie deficit. But remembering exercise can contribute to that too. So that can be slightly restricting some of our portions, watching, and this is weird to kind of bring up, but what are some healthy foods that we have to sometimes be mindful of can be really calorie dense to maybe think about, not to say cutting back, but saying I'm going to focus on portions. So I know that's an easy place for me to find that happy medium for weight management.
Yes, yeah. So those healthy foods that we definitely don't want to demonize at all, because they should be incorporated in those smaller doses. Of course, oils, super calorie dense, nuts even. They will provide a little bit more fiber, a little bit of protein too. I say avocado, but that's a little bit less calorie dense. You've got some fiber and carbohydrates in there too.
I think for me, granola is one of the top ones. I love granola. It's something I eat quite frequently, but a lot of times we get what we call portion distortion, where we talk about using the palm of your hand, and I'm like, it's only like a third of a cup. And sometimes people find, well, that doesn't keep me satisfied. So you might need to find another carb choice that gives you more feeling satisfied so you can stick to those portions.
Right. Using it more as like a condiment for crunch while maybe you recognize that oatmeal is going to be a lot more filling. It has more volume. It has less oils and sugar added to it. You can do that and maybe add a little bit of granola for crunch.
And dried fruit. Dried fruit is something that to me is powerful before exercise because it is low volume, meaning it's not going to be as heavy on the stomach, but It is quite easy because you've dehydrated all the water volume. It's very easy for you to be like, ooh, I had 600 calories of dried fruit just in an instant. So again, not demonizing these foods, but recognizing just because it's healthy doesn't mean it's an endless portion of enjoying.
Okay, well, speaking of dehydrated fruit, let's talk about hydration next. So electrolyte beverages have kind of been coming up. They're very trendy now, whether you are an athlete or not. What is your take on somebody who's considering an electrolyte supplement?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are saying, I'm dehydrated, and we don't always know what that means. But when we talk about traditional fueling nutrition or sports nutrition, if you will, we normally use the measurement unless you're doing more than 90 minutes of exercise and adding in a heat factor there, you probably don't need an electrolyte supplement, right? But when we think about electrolytes, not just from beverages, we also get those from food sources. Do you want to touch on what the main electrolyte sources we're getting from food are?
Well, sodium, of course, is a big
sodium.
one. But when we think about electrolyte losses through exercise, say you're on a really sweaty run, it's a hot day, primarily that's coming from sodium, but you're having more negligible losses from potassium, calcium, magnesium as well. So you'll see that making up a lot of the electrolyte beverages, but most Americans are getting plenty of sodium.
Yes.
Of course, we're actually getting a little bit too much sodium. Now that can help with water retention if you know that you're going out on a really hot, long run. But potassium is one that we know we're not getting enough of, so lots of fruits and vegetables. Again, think about the timing, but that can help. Calcium, of course, is going to be found in dairy products. So really, we want to just focus on a well-rounded diet. You mentioned not removing total food groups. That is key. So making sure that each plate is balanced and thinking about that timing.
And it astounds me that anytime we talk about a nutrition topic, it somehow comes back to maybe we should be eating more fruits and vegetables. But the potassium is probably the biggest component of that electrolyte balance. And if you're having symptoms of dehydration, like muscle cramping and things like that, a quick tip to remember potassium, which is kind of interesting. I say remember the O's: tomatoes, potatoes, oranges, avocados, and the bananas.
Everybody knows bananas for potassium.
Everyone knows bananas.
Not everybody knows about potatoes, though.
One of the highest sources.
Potatoes and oranges, absolutely.
So those are some quick other foods. And then we recognize fruits and vegetables are going to provide those carbohydrates we talked about. So that's a great thing to introduce in that 3 to 4 hour before time period. They're going to have more fiber. And then you mentioned bananas as a pre-exercise. What's fascinating with those is that anything we're not eating the peel on traditionally is going to have a lower fiber content. So even like apple slices without the peel, I mentioned applesauce typically doesn't have the peel.
Yes.
We recognize bananas, we remove the thick peel there that's going to contribute a lot of that fiber. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a simple tip to remember when you're thinking about quick digesting, simple sugars, lower fiber content in that 15-minute or an hour even range before activity. Now, I know a lot of people are curious about protein recommendations.
Yes.
Now, typically when we think about protein to maintain nitrogen balance, which nitrogen is found in protein. It's the only macronutrient with nitrogen, so that's kind of our standard measure. We talk about 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein, but a lot of people hear that and you think of, 55, 60 grams
a day.
That sounds pretty low compared to what you're hearing maybe on social media. However, additional protein can be beneficial if you are exercising at a higher level. So talk a little bit about that specific recommendation and how it differentiates between maybe somebody who's working out at the gym and lifting a lot of weights to somebody who's more of an endurance athlete.
Yeah, so it will vary, and I think you're bringing up some great points. You just gave us some numbers, and you gave us some measurements that a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, how do I know my kilograms? This is why working with somebody or getting advice from a professional that can give guidance, I think, is so important. It's easy to get in the social media trap and just say, oh, that sounds good, that works for them, but you got to figure out what works for you. So in terms of more strength-based training, we're going to see that we actually put more tears, micro tears into the muscle by doing that resistance training, and protein is needed to rebuild that muscle tissue. So if you're not getting enough protein, the likelihood that the next day, if you're doing more exercise, you're going in underfueled, I think we talked about that risk of maybe injury or lack of performance. But endurance athletes typically need more carbohydrates, but they're also going to be putting some wear and tear on those muscles, so needing some protein as well. I normally say anywhere from 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, but you might need guidance from a professional to figure out where you kind of stand in that range.
Absolutely, and there are so many other factors in play too. So maybe you're not looking to lose weight, and that's a perfectly acceptable range. Maybe you are looking to lose weight, and so while you're losing weight, unfortunately, you tend to lose muscle too. Yeah. And so working with a professional to establish an exact number, and then what that actually looks like in practice, because hearing numbers and then seeing it on your plate doesn't necessarily translate as easily. Generally, of course, we recommend including a protein source at every meal and snack. That's a good way to, and thinking about that plate method is a good way to ensure you're getting close to that recommendation.
When we say protein, we're traditionally talking about animal sources of protein because they're called complete proteins. And that can be, we talk about leaner choices, fish, chicken, turkey, eggs are one of my favorite, yogurt, dairy products. You can also get additional from plant-based proteins like beans, lentils, tofu. Another thing is supplements. So do you have any advice or guidance if somebody's questioning, do I need a protein supplement? Yes. How can those be utilized?
Well, I think it depends on the individual, your taste, your preferences. If you are, excluding animal proteins completely, I'm definitely probably going to steer people towards some sort of protein supplement because it can be difficult to get the amount of protein that you need, and especially those complete proteins.
Yes.
For somebody who is eating a balanced diet already, they may not necessarily need that. However, they might enjoy it. So we talked about early morning workouts. Those liquid supplements or liquid meals tend to be a little bit easier on the stomach. Plus, you're getting a little bit of fluid there. And so that's where I would kind of steer them. I guess it would just depend on what their current diet looks like.
Personally, for me, it is such an easy solution for after exercise because we've talked a lot about before, but you also, those glycogen stores that we've utilized need to be restored. So getting some carbs in after exercise. And we talk about the fueling window, the 3 to 4 hours before and the 1 to 2 hours before is the exact same thing you should be doing on the after phase, which is kind of nice. You're like, once you figure it out, it's pretty simple, but protein supplements after are going to, again, offer that support to your muscles. You can quickly get some more carbohydrates in. You can rehydrate. So if you're somebody that's like, I'm busy, I don't think about it, that can be a really easy thing to
Or you don't
in.
necessarily feel like eating a whole meal right after a really sweaty workout, right?
I know. I think you can tell from this, we obviously spend a lot of time sharing tips and kind of checking in on each other of how we're staying accountable for activity, because of course we're nutrition experts, so we primarily focus on food, but eating the right things and then not putting the work in to figure out how to move your body to support your health, it's almost like we're only getting one piece of that puzzle. So we can offer a lot of support and guidance on the right nutrients and fuel, but I think we try to lead by example by really taking care of our bodies in a way, and movement for us, and I guess I'll say for me, is something that I do more for my mental health because I recognize I'm able to stress manage better. I'm a better communicator. I'm probably a little bit more smiley on days I get a little extra exercise in. So I think people starting out for figuring out how to exercise more, you got to have a why. What's your motivator for movement? And then the second thing is enjoying the journey. Same goes with your nutrition. If you see something online that someone's like, I eat this before exercise because it provides this, this, and this. If you don't enjoy eating it, it causes disruptions, and then it's not going to be the solution for you.
Right.
So it's important to recognize.
Same with exercise.
Exercise, right? Yeah.
If you don't enjoy it, and if it feels like torture to do that and just squeeze it in as another task for your day, then it's probably not going to be sustainable for you.
Yeah.
So finding forms of movement that you actually enjoy, and then, yes, reframing it. So it's not about necessarily, the physical aspect. It's more for mental health.
Which is a huge part. And I think, too, recognizing it's great if we get to a point where you're enjoying exercise every day. But if that's not a season in your life that you can make work, giving yourself some grace to say, my goal is to be active 2 days a week, and to think about my nutrition a little bit extra on those days so I'm getting the most from it, that is also a great starting point for making those changes. And then I guess kind of last things for kind of key takeaways for shopping for fueling an active lifestyle. Are there any things that you tend to kind of lean into when you're in the grocery store or pick up quickly on the go? I'm going to ask you first, if you're headed to do some exercise, what's something you might pick up quickly? And then I guess we can both cover maybe what we get afterwards as well.
Yeah. Well, I kind of went over the banana and peanut butter is a really quick thing. I think graham crackers too, even though you might think, oh, there's not a ton of nutrition in there, but if it's something that's really like, I'm exercising in just a few minutes, I need something that's quick, that's great. You mentioned earlier yogurt. It kind of depends on the amount, but I can usually tolerate a little bit of yogurt. It's got some carbohydrates, It's got some protein, so that's going to be perfect. It's, usually I'll get the individual cups, so super portable too. For after, well, I'll let you do your before and then I can kind of tackle the after.
I'm definitely a big person. I love like watermelon and things like that before I exercise. Lots of times a little bit lower in fiber, high in water content. So you will catch me getting a snack cup of watermelon lots of times, and then probably a yogurt cup to go with that. And then another one I really, really like is they're in like our dairy section. They sometimes have like a little bit of cheese, a little bit of dried fruit, and it's a small volume of nuts. So we talked about limiting fat, but it's like the perfect portion amount that I get a little boost of energy, but nothing too crazy for digestive perspective.
Yeah, that's really smart. Well, and if I have more time, oatmeal is going to be my go-to before a run. If I have several, hours to digest it beforehand, then that's going to really fuel a longer run. For afterwards, the protein shake can be a great one. Oftentimes it is yogurt. Actually, I love in the summertime, especially some chocolate milk too. Ooh. So that, especially I'm kind of, they're not a sponsor, but Fairlife chocolate milk. So you're getting a little bit more protein in there. But generally when we talk about chocolate milk for athletes and exercise, it's got that perfect carbohydrate to protein ratio.
Yeah, it's a really easy solution. I tend to be somebody that actually is quite ravenous after exercising. So I also love to do like chicken and tuna pouches. That's a really quick, easy protein source. And then I'm probably getting something a little bit more carb heavy, like I'm finding a bagel or finding something. I'm definitely not afraid to eat after I get that really good workout in. I feel like I'm like, oh, I get to, again, thank my body for the activity it was able to do. And there's no bigger appreciation you can give than a good balanced meal. Yes, absolutely. And again, I know we dove into a lot of topics today that might be a little bit more overwhelming, but one thing that we love to connect people with is through our wellness club, where we try to share more in-depth advice. We get support from our pharmacy team. We kind of say that's our food with medicine. You get to really get some insight. So I think if people want to dive deeper and know what other resources, that's a great place to access on Food City. Joining our wellness club, so you can just get more knowledge and more of our personal and then general advice.
You mentioned personal. I think that's a perfect key takeaway, because we keep coming back to, yes, these are general guidelines that we give to people, but ultimately what works for me might not necessarily work for you. Yep. So that's a great resource.
Well, thank you for sharing with me today. It was awesome. I know we love talking about this topic.
Yes, thank you. It was fun.